Welcome to A House Built on Sand with Jabril Khalif Al Sadat and Mark Hunter Brooks. We're going to talk about one of two topics that'll be for the next two podcasts. The first one is on how politics affects your life. And this is going to be tied into the second podcast, which is talking about knowing thyself. And you'll hear Jabril talk about know thyself, and he's got some nice stories about history in that. But it's the importance of knowing who you are and how it plays into politics. And we wanted to talk about politics just because it's so, front of mind with everybody right now with the elections coming up. But we don't have to talk about liberals and conservatives, Republicans or Democrats, and all these things, one side or the other, but go back to basics on what politics is. Politics is trying to figure out, and this is my interpretation of it, so I'll just say that. Politics is trying to figure out what's most important for a community to do. What should they invest their resources and their time in order to better the community? And I wanted to offer this in the context of some of the things that we've talked about in earlier podcasts. We talked about the U.S. Constitution saying life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And those are three basic things that should be guarantees for everyone in the country. And then also this pyramid where I said that the four sides are your family, your friends, your coworkers, and your community. And that each one of the little bricks in that pyramid, you could represent as individual people in the community, that it relates to you and the people around you. And that's what politics is about. In my interpretation, is politics is trying to decide what's the highest priority for a community to do. But in order for you to figure that out, you've got to know yourself. You've got to know who you are and what your strengths and your weaknesses are and what your needs are and what's most important to you. Then if you can figure that out, and if your family can figure that out, whether you're, the parent or the child in that family, your friends can figure that out as you're talking to them. Your coworkers at the place where you work can figure that out. Then you can get into the community. And if everybody is doing that, you can decide as a community what's most important to you. Then your representative who goes to a higher, body can sit there and support and represent what's most important to you and your community in terms of what is most important for that greater body to do. So when we start talking about, all the different issues that you've seen in the debates lately and the TV commercials and the internet ads and stuff like that, those are things that some people say are most important to them. But what's most important to you? And you don't know that unless you know who you are. What's most important to your community? Your community doesn't know that until your community knows what are the most important things for the people in that community and the families in that community. And when they can figure that out, they can give that to people who can go to larger bodies and sit there and represent that. And that's my understanding of politics. And then also too, if you think about, and I don't have firsthand experience of this, but hundreds of years ago, the Native Americans in North America, they shared everything that they had. They got along as a community, and they knew who they were, and they knew who their families were, and they knew who their tribe was, their community was. And so they were able to, do the things that were most important for them. And I think if we think of politics in that regard, is what's most important for not only me, and not think of yourself first, but think of your community first, then we can sit and work through the things that are most important for our nation, for our state, and for our local communities. So that's where I wanted to start out with, and we'll see what Jabril picks up on and goes with, and then we'll just take it from there. How's that?
Well, I mean, let me start off, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. It's good to talk to you, everybody, today. And the thing that I'm going to be a little bit more granular on politics, and then I want to widen it out. I'm going to start small, and then I'm going to widen it out. I remember politics. When I first remember politics, I was knocking door to door with my mother handing out flyers like a precinct captain, trying to get people to vote, any way to vote, you know, getting people up off the corner, you know, doing whatever I had to do. They would have what they called seed money, and that they would put on the street, that you know you would go by and you know give this guy $5 to go in there and do a vote and stuff like that. They still do it in some cities now. And politics was never an abstract idea. It was more pragmatic. Because in those days, I grew up in Chicago, on the west side of Chicago. My mother was in real estate, and anybody that was in business and doing business with the city, you had to grease the wheel. This was the Chicago, the old boss, Richard M. Daley. And everything, the only thing that made the city run, you know, the Chicago was called the city of big shoulders, and it ran well. But the thing that greased the city that made it ran well was money. And money was the mother's milk of politics. And everybody had to be in politics. If you had a violation, and then the inspector came around and you had a violation and he was going to close you down, grease a little bit to your alderman, and it would go away. If you needed a permit and you didn't have a permit and the bureaucracy was back up, go to the precinct captain, give him a little money, and your permit the next day would be there. So politics to me, as I came along, was pragmatic in that sense, that it was something that the community used to make it work. If you need another garbage can, you'll be surprised how political garbage cans are. Excuse me. But if you need an extra garbage can, you would have to go to the precinct captain to get an extra garbage can. If you needed your garbage picked up on time, if you needed your city swept, cleaned, anything that you needed to have done, you had to go through your precinct captain and through your alderman. And what was the price for that? The price for that was either you give a little bribe, but you definitely had to vote. You had to make your numbers. So that's what politics was. It was a game of survival. If you wanted to live in Chicago, if you wanted to survive in Chicago, you played the game of politics, because that's the way you got things done. You know, my mother got her last license when she was 90 years old, and she never even seen the DMV. They just came by, a lady came by one day and gave it to her. You know, just told her to sign her name on the paper and just, you know, I'll come by and I'll bring it back to you. And that's what she did. Because that was politics. She had played the game all her life. Everybody knew it. She was the first one down at the polling place. If she wasn't the first one down at the polling place, people would come look for her. Because they know if she didn't vote, there was something wrong, because she always voted. You know, and they always made room for her. Or they parted those C's for her so she could come in and give her vote. Because if she was going to vote, she'd get everybody else out on the block to vote too. You know, and that's what politics meant to me. But politics in the wider sense comes from the Greek word polis, which means state. And politics is about people getting together and trying to agree on how to make society work. You know, and I was talking to Mark earlier, for Plato, politics was more about aristocracy. He had, if you ever read Plato's Republic, which most people don't these days, he had this idealized version of what a society, how to put a society together and how to make a society work. And he had these different sections about people would take tests to find out, almost like this book Diversion that came out, the scientific book, about everybody would take a test to figure out what slot in society they would best fit in. And the person who wrote that book probably got that idea from Plato. And, you know, if you reached a certain, you know, points, then they slot you in. You either was a warrior, a soldier, or you were a politician, or you were, you know, a laborer, or whatever you were, depending on your acumen of when you took this test. But at the top of the pyramid, you know, going back to what Mark said, at the top of the pyramid was the ruler, was the one person who ruled over everything else, and that was a philosopher king, because a philosopher king would have wisdom, and he would use reason to try to make the best decisions for society. On the other side of that, you would have somebody like Marx, who believed that, you know, in a society where if everybody was equal and everybody made the decisions, then everybody shared the wealth, then it would be a better society. It would be a more communal society. Unfortunately, human beings being the way they are, and human beings always going to their basic instincts, it doesn't work that way. The Soviet Union was a communist society, but it still had classes. And it wasn't a true communist society because in a true communist society, you don't have a class structure system. But it did. The rich got richer, the poor got poor. Stalin starved a lot of his countrymen just so him and his buddies can reap the rewards of it. The same thing was true in China too. China is a communist country right now, but it has a class structure. Same way with Cuba, same way with Vietnam, because human beings being the way they are, they're always going to go to the baser instincts where the stronger is always going to take advantage of the weak. And we need to find a new way, as Mark was saying, of doing politics. We need to find a new way to live with the state. And the state is us, because we decide how the state is set up. We decide what the state does. We cannot sit back and complain about what the state is doing when we have a decision to form it. Now, it's our fault if we hire these politicians and they say one thing, but when they get in there, they do something else. It's our fault if every president we hire go in there broke, if he doesn't already have money, and he comes out a millionaire. There's something wrong with that. No, we don't want our presidents to be like, Ulysses S. Grant, who had to write his memoirs so his family could survive while he was dying of cancer. We don't want that anymore. That's why we started pensions for our presidents. But also, we don't want our presidents getting rich off of the knowledge just because they were presidents and nothing else. They have these phony book deals where they get $6 million up front and they write these big tomes. Half the time, people don't read these books. I don't know about you, but when is the last time you read a presidential biography? I haven't. I'd rather read about Winston Churchill. He's not even American. So a lot of these deals are set up by these companies that are run by these big corporations, that's run by these billionaires that's set up just to give funnel these people money to make friends and to pay off for tax breaks that they gave them while they was in office. That's it. Our system is corrupt because we allow our system to be corrupt. But our system is not the only corrupt system. Most political systems around the world are corrupt now because the rich have overtaken, the rich and the corporations have taken over these systems and they use them to their advantage. And it doesn't matter if you're on the left or on the right, it's the same thing. People get greedy. People get empowered. That is the one essence of all these systems, is about power. Power is something that people do not give up. Power is something that once people have it, they want more of it. And that's because we don't have people who are ethically true or ethically correct. And I don't know if you can get anybody like that, because if you did get somebody like that, they'd probably end up killing them. No one likes a good king. If you're a good king and you're not paranoid and you're trying to do the best for your people, guarantee you the next wine you drink is going to be spiked with some cyanide. Nobody likes a good king because they equate goodness with weakness, which is something twisted in our mentality. You can be a good king. You can be a fair king. You can be a good president. You can be a fair president. Even though you have these opposite groups pulling at you and trying to get you to go in different directions. Go ahead.
Oh, no, it was good. But you were making me think right at the start when you were talking about your life in Chicago and how your mother would get things done and how people in the community would get things done. It was reminding me, my dad fought in World War II, and he was in the South Pacific on a ship. He was a radioman. And there was one time their ship had pulled into port and they needed to get the teletype refurbished. And they only had a couple days in port, and the officer in charge told my dad, he says, figure out how to get it done. We've got to get this thing repaired and oiled and greased and ready to run, so that when we take off again, it'll be okay. And the way Dad got it done was he went and talked to some of the people, on the base, and he gave one guy 10 pounds of coffee from the ship's store. And the next thing you know, that teletype was on a crane being hauled off the ship and out onto the dock, and they took it off and refurbished it and brought it back the next day.
Yeah.
And it was just people helping each other. And sometimes I think we've kind of lost that. And 100 years ago, people were in touch with the land. They grew their own food. They had their own cattle, and they were able to support themselves. But when somebody else needed support, they would help people out. People knew how to sew. They knew how to cook. They know how to, make things and create things, make furniture, and build houses. And you have people in, certain parts of Pennsylvania that they'll go out and build a barn for somebody in a day, and everybody in the community will come together. And there's no expectation for pay. It's just you're part of the community. So, if somebody does something for you, you do something for them. And I think we've kind of gotten away from that. And part of that reason, I think, is because we've lost touch with other people in the community. And that's something that's really important, I think, that needs to be recaptured, is to find out who it is that is living next to you and in and around you, in the block around you, and build your own community from there so that you can help each other and then branch out from that point. But we need to build our communities so that we can have better politics, because I feel like right now, with this disconnection between who we are, our families, and our communities are, the people who are making laws and deciding what needs to be done, they aren't necessarily doing what's the best thing for us in terms of our priorities. They're doing things that are important, of course, but they may not be doing what's best and the highest priority for people in all the communities that are around. And we need better representation. And that comes from a better knowledge of who we are, knowing ourselves, and knowing our families, our friends, and knowing our community.
Well, what's happening now is the community has been fractured, but it hasn't been fractured recently. It's been fractured for the last 50 years. People now are living in their own bubble. They're looking for their own quote unquote truth. It used to be like when I used to teach logic, you start with an argument and you use evidence to look for the truth. Well, nowadays people start with the truth. They look for the evidence to back up their argument, which is, excuse my language, ass backwards. So if you start off with an idea in your head and this idea is the truth, then you go and you look for evidence to prove that what you thought in the first place was truth instead of the other way around. But the other way around is how you learn. It's how you gather knowledge. To admit that you don't know something and to go out and look and then, take one argument and take a counter argument and weigh them against the evidence each one of them shows, to try to figure out what is true, what is correct, what is the right thing that you're talking about. And unfortunately now that, we have, even living where I live at, people don't know each other. Where I grew up on a block that my family was there for 40 years. I knew the grandmothers, the parents, the children, and sometimes even the grandchildren. We had been there all our lives. We had built up a community. We had block parties. We dated each other. We fought each other. We shot at each other. We did all things together. Some of us went to jail together. So we were a community. We were a group. When I tell Mark about, the gang that I was in, it started with 7 guys in St. Charles, which was a boys' reformatory. And the reason why they got together is because a bigger gang was trying to move in on our block. So they got together for self-preservation. And it just spread out and got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's what it is. A gang is a political organization. I remember when I first went to college at the University of Illinois, and I had went to college after I got out the military, and then I went to France to cook for a little bit, and then I came home. And I went to the University of Illinois, and I was an English major. And I think I was like 25 at the time, so I was older than most of these college students because they had just come out of high school and whatnot. And they started a fraternity, and so I went into to the common room, and I told them, I'm like, yeah, your fraternity, because they were doing pledging and they were harassing each other and doing all this stuff. And I remember what I had to go through to get into the gang. And I told them, I said, look, all your fraternity is a gang.
I bet that went over well.
Well, the idea was correct, but the way I stated it was wrong. What I was trying to say is that just like a fraternity, a gang is a political organization.
Yeah.
Because the gang becomes the state, just like the fraternity becomes the state. And you swear fidelity to that state. Mm-hmm. And you have to go through an initiatory process to get into the fraternity. It's the same way you have to do to get into a gang. So like I said, I was kind of unartful in my speech, but my idea was correct.
It was true, yeah.
It wasn't much difference between the two. You're in a fraternity, it's a social organization. You're in a fraternity for life. Your brothers help you out. Your brothers help you do things in a different way. And the same way when you go join a gang. You're in a gang for life. The only way you get out, you die out. That's it. Yeah. So, we have to understand when we talk about politics, what we talk about. Like I said, politics come from the Greek word polis, and polis means state. But state can mean a lot of different things. The state just doesn't have to mean a government entity. It can mean the organization that you belong to can be that state that you're dealing in, that state that you swear for fidelity to. So that's how we have to look at it. And we have to understand now that our politics now is so broken because everybody's trying to live in a different country. Not everybody's trying to live in the same country. You have one country that's changing and it's getting more diverse. And you have another country that wants to go back to the way it was. And the idea doesn't fit everybody. The country that's changing is frightening to people who are used to the way it used to be. And the country that they want to go back to never worked and is frightening to the people who want change. So you have two opposite ideas going on there. What's going to happen is you're going to have to find a way to mesh the two ideas together and to let the people who are afraid of change, that it's going to be all right. Heraclitus said, it was a Greek philosopher, said, you can't step in the same river twice. Change is inevitable. There's always change. You can't ever stop change. You can try to slow it down, but you can't stop it. Yeah. It's going to happen. Look at what's happening in Israel now with all these Arab countries, started to do work with Israel and have relationships with Israel, because they realize that what's been working for 70 years is not working. It doesn't make any sense. It never made any sense. So they have to change, because with change comes growth. Nothing stays the same. Your skin sheds cells every day, and you can't stop that. How can you stop the change of history?
Yeah, and I like that too. That politics is also a way of creating change and managing change, and then leading a community through change. Because like you were saying, there are people who are afraid to change, and this is the same thing that's true in corporations. Is that it's actually a skill to be able to lead groups of people through change. And you have to talk about the benefits of the far side and make the process of going through the change less painful than the process of staying where you are. And, people talk about, you're going to have a dip in your productivity or your way of life as you're moving from one position to another. But it's a process. And you can relate it back to politics too. Is politics is a process for how to change and how to prioritize what's going on. But like Jabril said, there are people who don't want to change, and I think as most people get older, they get less and less willing to change. I'm not trying to say it's older people that are resistant in this case or not, but we see it in all different people in all different walks of life. That it's fear. And we talked about fear in an earlier podcast too, that You need mentors, you need leaders, people who have had experience in change to help lead you through it and help it not be as fearful, to help make that change, the process of going through the change, less painful in the process of staying where you are. So there's a lot of positive things that can happen with politics. I know politics gets a bad name, and it's partly because of some of the things that have occurred that people know about and hear about. But politics can be a real positive thing too if we look at it from a positive standpoint and get involved and participate in that process and understand who we are and who our community is, so that we can uh, you know support and defend the things that are most important for the people that are around us. And again, I've said this before, we've lost that, but we've lost, I think, too, an idea of who we are as people. And we'll talk about these in future podcasts too, is knowing who you are. We can talk a little bit about money and what money is, but this will be a good kickoff for the next few podcasts that we have.
But we're talking about change, and about most of the people that are afraid of change are older people. And there's nothing worse than a boxer who stays too long past his prime. It's just like when I was in the kitchen. I spent my last time as executive chef when I was 50 years old, and all the cooks and my sous chefs were in their 20s. So I was old enough to either be their father or their grandfather. And I realized I had stayed too long. Like, as long as you own the kitchen or you're the boss of the kitchen, it's different because you're doing whatever you want. You're piddling around. Nobody, but I'm talking about working for somebody else, being a working chef. When you're that age, it's a little bit too old. But it's nothing more sad to see people who still saying, 50's the new 20 and 60's the new 30. No, it isn't. 50 is 50, 60, 60, 70, 70, 80's 80. Because, Cicero, the great Roman statesman Cicero, he used to talk about that. He said, it's not by strength or speed or swiftness of body that great deeds are done when you get older. He said, but by wisdom, character, and sober judgment. And instead of enjoying what age has brought us, we are trying to reach back to something that we'll never have. Growing old, is nothing wrong with it, but we need to grow wiser too. Unfortunately, too many of us people, as we grow older in America, we still act like we're 20 years old. And that's the saddest part about it. Growing old doesn't mean being decrepit. Growing old means to know that you have something else, something different to give to society, to give to the politics of society, and make room for the young people to grow like room was made for us to grow. And that's all I have to say.
That's a very good point. And we've pretty much reached the end of our podcast too. So we appreciate you hanging in here and listening to us, and hope you'll come back and listen to us again when we talk about the importance of knowing who you are. So this is Jabril and Mark signing off, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Assalamu alaikum.